Bloomberg News reporting that President Trump is expected to open the door to imposing tariffs as a way to respond to digital services taxes. These are taxes that some companies implement against digital goods and services, and they hit some of the biggest U.S. tech companies like Meta and Alphabet.
The topic of tariffs has been a major discussion point in global economics, and one of the most controversial tariff policies in recent history was implemented by former U.S. President Donald Trump. His administration imposed tariffs on several countries, including China, the European Union, Canada, and Mexico, in an effort to promote American industries and reduce trade imbalances. But what were the actual effects of these tariffs? How did they impact not just the countries they were imposed on, but also the U.S. economy itself? To understand this, let's first break down what tariffs are and why governments use them. A tariff is essentially a tax on imported goods, which makes those goods more expensive when they enter a country. The idea behind tariffs is to encourage people to buy domestic products instead of foreign ones. While this may sound like a good strategy for protecting local industries, the reality is often more complicated, especially in a globalized economy where countries rely on each other for trade. One of the biggest moves made by Trump was the introduction of tariffs on Chinese goods, which kicked off what is now known as the U.S. China trade war. In 2018, the Trump administration imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports, arguing that China was engaging in unfair trade practices, such as intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers. China responded by imposing its own tariffs on American products, escalating tensions between the two economic giants. The effects of this trade war were felt worldwide. In the U.S., industries that relied on Chinese imports, such as technology, manufacturing, and retail, saw an increase in costs. Companies had to pay higher prices for essential components, which in turn led to higher prices for consumers. American farmers were also hit hard, as China was one of the largest buyers of U.S. agricultural products like soybeans and pork. When China imposed retaliatory tariffs on these goods, many American farmers saw a significant drop in demand, leading to financial struggles and even farm closures. But China wasn't the only country affected. Trump's tariff policies extended to traditional allies as well. In 2018, his administration imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, arguing that these imports threatened U.S. national security. These countries, in turn, imposed their own retaliatory tariffs on American goods, leading to higher prices for consumers and strained diplomatic relations. For example, Canada responded by imposing tariffs on U.S. products such as dairy, whiskey, and motor vehicles. This hurt American farmers and manufacturers who relied on Canadian buyers. Similarly, the European Union imposed tariffs on American goods like motorcycles, jeans, and bourbon, impacting industries that had nothing to do with steel or aluminum production. The result was a trade conflict that affected businesses and workers on both sides of the Atlantic. So, what was the overall impact of Trump's tariffs? On one hand, some U.S. industries benefited. The tariffs did provide some protection for American steel and aluminum producers by making foreign alternatives more expensive. This temporarily helped boost jobs in those sectors. However, the overall economic impact was mixed. While some industries gained, many more suffered due to increased costs and lost international markets. One major consequence was the rise in consumer prices. Since many goods became more expensive to import, American companies had to either absorb the costs or pass them on to consumers. This meant that everyday items, from electronics to household goods, became more expensive for American families. Additionally, while Trump argued that tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., the reality was more complex. Many companies responded by shifting their supply chains to other countries instead of returning production to the U.S. For example, instead of relying on Chinese imports, some American companies turned to Vietnam, India, and other nations. This meant that while China was affected, American manufacturing didn't necessarily see the boost that had been promised. Another impact was on the stock market. Trade uncertainty created volatility in global markets as investors worried about the long-term economic consequences of the trade war. Every time new tariffs were announced, markets reacted negatively, causing fluctuations in stock prices. Outside of the U.S., Trump's tariffs also had significant effects on other economies. China, for example, saw a slowdown in exports to the U.S., which impacted its economic growth. However, China also adapted by seeking new trade partners and investing in other markets. The European Union and Canada also had to adjust, finding alternative suppliers and markets for their products. But perhaps one of the biggest consequences of Trump's tariff policies was the shift in global trade alliances. As countries faced tariffs from the U.S., they began forming new agreements with each other, reducing their reliance on American trade. For instance, China expanded trade deals with countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, while the European Union strengthened its trade relationships with Japan and Canada. This shift may have long-term consequences for America's role in global trade. So, did Trump's tariffs achieve their intended goals? The answer depends on how you measure success. If the goal was to pressure China into changing its trade practices, the tariffs had limited success, as China did make some concessions in trade negotiations but did not fundamentally alter its economic policies. If the goal was to protect American industries, the impact was temporary, with some sectors benefiting while others struggled. And if the goal was to reduce the U.S. trade deficit, the results were mixed, as the trade deficit with China remained significant, while trade deficits with other countries grew. The Biden administration has taken a different approach to trade policy, maintaining some tariffs but also working to rebuild relationships with allies. The long-term impact of Trump's tariffs is still being debated, but one thing is clear: they changed the way global trade works and forced countries to rethink their economic strategies. What do you think about Trump's tariffs? Were they a smart move for the U.S. economy, or did they do more harm than good? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more in-depth discussions on global economics and trade policies. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.